The great chief of Tascaloosa sits silently on a raised platform inside the fortified settlement of Mabila, calmly watching as an armed detachment of Europeans slowly rides through the open wooden gates. The air is thick with tension, but absolute silence reigns over the vast plaza, masterfully concealing the presence of 800 trained warriors. The European officers confidently inspect the empty buildings, completely unaware of the carefully orchestrated strategic trap. Every large building surrounding the central square has been transformed in advance into a fortified position, ready to change the course of colonial history. This paradoxically peaceful scene will become the decisive moment that halts the unstoppable advance of Hernando de Soto's expedition deep into the continent. Are you ready to learn the truth about how flawless tactics completely outmaneuvered steel armor? Today, we'll take a detailed look at one of the most significant episodes of the diplomatic and strategic standoff of 1540. Most historical sources tend to focus on the superiority of the colonial expeditions, overlooking the complex political maneuvers of the indigenous peoples of North America. We will analyze in detail every step of this incredible strategic maneuver, in which the freedom of a vast confederacy was at stake. This historical episode vividly demonstrates the exceptionally high level of social organization among the ancestors of the modern Choctaw. You will see how diplomatic cunning led a regular expedition to voluntarily walk into a carefully engineered trap. We will examine the specific architectural solutions employed by the leaders of the Mississippian culture, which transformed a trading settlement into an impenetrable labyrinth. Every element of our investigation will be based on rigorous historical facts from that period. You'll learn the exact numbers, complex routes, and carefully calculated decisions that led to a grand clash between two completely different systems of governance. Watch the video to the end, and you'll discover how 800 Choctaw warriors stopped Hernando de Soto's Spanish expedition. In early October 1540, Hernando de Soto's detachment was advancing confidently through the forests of southeastern North America. The expedition consisted of exactly 600 well-organized European professionals, accustomed to achieving their goals through direct pressure. They employed a well-established method of advancement, demanding that the settlements they encountered provide them with resources and provisions. However, on the ancestral lands of the Choctaw people, their standard strategy clashed with the powerful, centralized authority of a local political confederacy. The territories were under the strict control of Chief Tascaloosa, who oversaw an extensive network of villages and key trade routes. This leader was distinguished by his phenomenal political acumen and exceptional composure when negotiating with outsiders. Tascaloosa's appearance reflected his high status, and his every movement demonstrated absolute confidence in his own authority. The chief immediately realized the futility of open, head-on resistance against a regular military force on the open plains. Instead, he chose the path of complex diplomatic maneuvers to protect his community's resources. The Spanish officers approached the chief's main residence with their usual set of harsh ultimatums. Hernando de Soto demanded that porters, provisions, and free passage through the Confederation's sovereign territories be provided. In response, Tascaloosa showed no signs of indignation or fear toward the armed representatives of another civilization. He calmly listened to the demands through interpreters, maintaining the icy composure of a high-ranking diplomat. This behavior stood in stark contrast to the reactions of other rulers the Europeans had encountered previously. The chief made a deliberate decision to create the appearance of complete submission to the expedition's superior force. He agreed to provide some of the requested supplies to lull the European navigators into a false sense of security. Tascaloosa understood the importance of buying time to mobilize his own forces deep within his lands. His agreement was merely the first move in a complex, multi-layered game against the uninvited guests. The colonizers interpreted this diplomatic concession as yet another easy victory for themselves. The Spaniards followed their standard practice of seizing local leaders as guarantors of the march's safety. They insisted that Tascaloosa accompany their detachment as they advanced through the territory of the Confederacy. The chief had anticipated this move and offered no resistance. Joining the column of 600 men, he turned his forced position as a hostage into an ideal vantage point for gathering intelligence. The chief had the opportunity to personally study the organization, armament, and vulnerabilities of the European detachment. During the joint march, Tascaloosa closely observed the logistical challenges facing the colonial expedition. He saw how dependent the Europeans were on their heavy supply train, and how vulnerable they were in rugged terrain. Each stop the expedition made provided the chief with new information about the strangers' daily routine and pace of travel. This valuable knowledge was immediately incorporated into the development of a large-scale plan to neutralize the threat. The Spanish commanders had no idea that their honored prisoner was the mastermind behind their impending defeat. While inside the European column, the chief continued to secretly command his people through trusted intermediaries. Settlements along the route received covert instructions not to offer resistance and to provide only minimal provisions. This tactic stretched the expedition's lines of communication and forced the detachment to follow a strictly defined route. De Soto was steering the Tascaloosa precisely to where the terrain would work against heavy infantry. Control of the situation had passed entirely into the hands of the Choctaw ancestors, long before any open confrontation. The Europeans were blinded by their own sense of superiority and failed to notice their growing isolation. They advanced along narrow forest trails, moving farther and farther north from their safe bases. The forest grew denser, and the distances between their allied villages increased rapidly. The expedition gradually transformed from conquerors into blind travelers, led by a foreign will. The map of the region now worked exclusively to fulfill the Tuscaloosa's strategic plan. With each passing day of the march, the colonists' confidence in the safety of their position worked against them. They stopped sending out long-range reconnaissance patrols, relying on the presence of the supreme chief in their ranks. This negligence allowed the forces of the indigenous peoples to concentrate unhindered at a strategically important point. The chosen location was situated at the intersection of trade routes and served as an ideal staging ground. The Tascaloosa plan entered its final stage of preparation without the Spaniards showing the slightest sign of alarm. I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think of Tascaloosa's diplomatic restraint in the face of colonial pressure? Share your thoughts in the comments. While Tascaloosa rode peacefully, surrounded by Spanish officers, his invisible network of communications was operating at full capacity. Swift messengers relayed the chief's orders from one community to another, using hidden forest trails. Not a single European soldier noticed this complex process of transmitting information over vast distances. The ruler's diplomatic deference served as the perfect cover for a large-scale covert mobilization. The best warriors from the Confederation's most remote villages began arriving at a predetermined location. Exactly 800 fighters left their homes to unite in defense of their shared territorial interests. They moved in small groups, leaving no traces on the soft forest soil of the southeast. Each warrior carried a supply of provisions and carefully prepared close-range weapons. The assembly point was chosen to ensure maximum secrecy and logistical convenience for the defenders. The settlement of Mabila, situated on high ground near a river floodplain, became the focal point for the concentration of forces. This town was one of the Alliance's administrative centers, surrounded by a sturdy wooden wall. Tascaloosa convinced De Soto to direct the column there, promising to provide the necessary supplies. The Spaniards viewed this proposal as the logical conclusion to the lengthy negotiations regarding the expedition's supplies. They did not know that they were heading straight into the center of a prepared tactical zone. On the way to Mabila, the chief continued to play a subtle psychological game with the leadership of the European expedition. He engaged in lengthy conversations through interpreters, feigning interest in the colonizers' culture and objectives. Tascaloosa skillfully diverted De Soto's attention from security concerns to discussions of future trade prospects. This smokescreen prevented the Spaniards from objectively assessing the changes in the surrounding landscape. The expedition was inexorably approaching the borders of the fortified settlement in a state of complete complacency. The organization of the indigenous peoples was striking for its coordination and strict discipline at every stage of preparation. The warriors inside Mabila received clear instructions regarding their positions and the time to begin operations. No one had the right to disobey the chief's orders or act on their own initiative. The principle of collective responsibility ensured absolute secrecy for the operation being carried out within the settlement's walls. The large militia literally blended into the town's ordinary wooden buildings. The Spanish column of 600 men stretched for several kilometers along a narrow forest road. The heavily armed vanguard had pulled significantly ahead of the supply train, which was carrying provisions and gunpowder. Tascaloosa understood perfectly well that dividing the enemy's forces was the key to the success of his plan. He encouraged the vanguard officers to hurry so they could reach the comfortable homes of the promised settlement as quickly as possible. The expedition's supply line became extremely vulnerable in the face of the hidden threat. The chief's diplomacy reached its climax. The moment the walls of Mabila came into view through the trees, Tascaloosa assured the Spaniards that a warm welcome, rest, and abundant food awaited them inside. The local residents, who had remained outside, warmly welcomed the vanguard, performing traditional ceremonial dances. This display of hospitality finally dispelled the last doubts of the experienced European commanders. The conquistadors' minds were completely under the illusion of having full control over the situation. Under the cover of dancing and music, the Choctaw warriors took up their final positions inside the large buildings. They silently checked their weapons, awaiting a prearranged signal from their supreme ruler. Tascaloosa's diplomatic mission was carried out flawlessly, becoming a perfect weapon of disinformation. He lured the enemy army into his trap, at the right time and in the right place. The moment had come to move from words to concrete tactical actions. Every step the Europeans took toward the city gates was the result of the local leaders' mathematically precise calculations. 600 outsiders voluntarily ceded the initiative to the 800 defenders of their homeland. The art of negotiation proved stronger than steel, cannons, and the colonizers' many years of military experience. The Choctaw ancestors proved that intellectual superiority is more important than technological equipment. This pause was merely a smokescreen to prepare a grand engineering trap. How exactly did the geometry of an ordinary settlement turn into a deadly labyrinth for the European infantry? The Mabila settlement was not a primitive camp. It was a complex architectural complex of the Mississippian culture. The city was surrounded by a massive palisade built of massive tree trunks, deeply embedded in the ground. The walls were further reinforced with a thick layer of clay mixed with strong plant fibers. This structure possessed remarkable stability and could effectively absorb mechanical impacts. Indigenous engineers employed advanced fortification techniques when planning the outer perimeter. At regular intervals along the wall, special observation platforms and defensive bastions were erected. These projections allowed for control of the space around the walls and eliminated blind spots at the base of the palisade. Mabila's architecture was specifically adapted for defense against a numerous and well-organized enemy. Every detail of the fortifications demonstrated a deep understanding of the principles of spatial control. The settlement's gates were deliberately designed to be narrow, in order to limit the entrance's capacity. Only one horseman or two infantrymen could pass through at a time, which disrupted any tight formation. This architectural solution automatically transformed an organized column into a scattered chain of vulnerable individuals. The Spaniards were forced to break their tactical formations simply to enter the city. The narrowness of the passageways became the first invisible obstacle in the path of the colonial expedition. The area around Mabila had been cleared in advance of trees, shrubs, and tall grass. The resulting open space deprived a potential enemy of any natural cover as it approached the city. Lookouts on the walls had a perfect view of the terrain within archery range. The defenders could detect any movements of enemy forces approaching the gates well in advance. Skillful use of the landscape greatly enhanced the defensive capabilities of the wooden fortress. Inside the settlement, houses were arranged around a central square, forming a closed and controllable space. The buildings themselves were sturdy structures with a framework of thick poles and clay walls. This construction technique made them reliable shelters capable of withstanding serious external impacts. The roofs were covered with a thick layer of dense reed mats, providing protection from the elements. The town's internal layout resembled a complex geometric network with numerous intersections. Tascaloosa ordered most of the civilians to be temporarily evacuated from Mabila before the expedition's arrival. In their place, 800 armed Confederate warriors were secretly stationed inside the massive houses. The spacious buildings concealed hundreds of people, maintaining the outward illusion of ordinary daily life. The walls effectively muffled any sounds, preventing the Spaniards from hearing the hidden armies breathing. The city's architecture became the perfect tool for concealing a vast number of fighters. The windows and doorways of the houses had been widened and modified in advance to facilitate defense. The soldiers could monitor the entire central square while remaining invisible to those within it. Each building became an autonomous defensive unit with its own supply of arrows and spears. The overlapping fields of view from different houses created a dense zone of control over the open space. The city became a single engineering mechanism designed to neutralize any outsiders who found themselves inside. To the European soldiers, Mabila's architecture looked simply like a collection of exotic huts. They were unable to discern the hidden fortification strategies in the arrangement of the logs and clay walls. This inability to understand the foreign engineering logic became their greatest vulnerability that day. The Spaniards assessed safety exclusively according to the familiar European standards of stone castles. The wooden labyrinth of the Mississippi culture proved to be a completely unpredictable environment for them. The architecture of resistance worked flawlessly, setting the perfect stage for a decisive historical moment. The city was ready to swallow up the expedition's vanguard, depriving it of its maneuverability and the advantages of formation. All of Mabila's architectural lines converged at a single point, where the colonial march was destined to come to a halt. The Choctaws' engineering had proven its effectiveness even before hostilities began. The fortifications bided their time, maintaining a deathly silence. In the next chapter, you'll learn how the Spanish vanguard reacted to this ominous silence within the walls. What would happen if no one learned of this strategic maneuver in time? On the morning of October 18th, the Spanish vanguard, led by Hernando de Soto, approached the cleared area in front of Mabila. The detachment consisted of the most experienced cavalrymen and officers, who formed the elite of the colonial expedition. They were exhausted from the long march through the damp forests and eagerly awaited the promised rest. The settlement's geographical isolation only intensified their desire to get inside the protected perimeter as soon as possible. The rest of the column, including the heavily armed infantry and the supply train, had fallen far behind on the narrow forest trails. The geography of the route had naturally divided the 600 Spaniards into several isolated groups. De Soto made the risky decision not to wait for the main forces to catch up before entering the city. He was absolutely confident in his safety, thanks to the presence of the Tascaloosa by his side. This overconfidence led him to ignore the basic rules of military caution in unfamiliar terrain. The narrow gates of Mabila forced the horsemen to dismount and lead their horses through one at a time. The process of entering took a long time, disrupting the cavalry unit's usual rhythm of movement. After passing through the palisade, the Spaniards found themselves in a spacious central square, surrounded by tall buildings. The square looked completely empty, which stood in stark contrast to the boisterous welcome outside the walls. The geometry of the enclosed space began to exert psychological pressure on the experienced European officers. Tascaloosa, accompanied by De Soto, calmly walked toward one of the largest buildings in the square. The chief moved with the dignity of a master controlling every centimeter of his territory. He sat down on a raised platform near the house, signaling that his diplomatic mission as an escort was complete. The expedition officers began to scatter across the square, searching the empty dwellings for food. The layout of the town gradually transformed them from an organized detachment into a disorganized crowd. Suddenly, Tascaloosa stood up, took a few steps, and disappeared inside a massive wooden house. The Spaniards did not immediately grasp the significance of this simple geographical movement by the supreme ruler. One of the officers approached the door and rudely demanded that the chief return to the square immediately. In response, not a sound came from the dim interior of the building. Only silence hung over Mabila. The space between the colonizers and the indigenous population instantly lost its status of diplomatic neutrality. The officer attempted to force his way into the house, violating the personal space of the Confederation's leader. At that moment, the layout of the square played a decisive role in altering the course of events. A high-ranking representative of the Choctaw emerged like a flash from a neighboring building and blocked the Spaniards' path. A brief verbal exchange ensued, escalating into a sharp physical confrontation between representatives of the two worlds. This incident became the spark that ignited a long-simmering powder keg. In that very instant, the wooden walls of Mabila seemed to come to life, dispelling the illusion of emptiness. 800 Choctaw warriors began pouring out rapidly from concealed positions inside every house. They appeared from all sides at once, cutting off the Spaniards' routes to the narrow city gates. The geographical advantage of the enclosed area had completely shifted to the defenders of the settlement. The expedition's vanguard found itself at the epicenter of a perfectly planned and brilliantly executed spatial trap. The Spanish cavalry, accustomed to wide-ranging maneuvers, found themselves trapped between dense rows of houses. Their long spears and heavy swords lost their effectiveness in the confines of the city square. The indigenous warriors, on the other hand, used compact weapons ideally suited for confined spaces. They acted in unison, executing a pre-rehearsed plan to control every meter of the territory. The geography of Mabila became Tascaloosa's greatest ally in the opening minutes of the epic clash. De Soto realized that their only chance of survival was to break out beyond the walls immediately. He gave the order to retreat toward the gates, abandoning their horses and some of their equipment in the square. The Europeans began to struggle their way through the narrow passage, suffering colossal tactical losses. The city's geography, which an hour earlier had seemed like their salvation, was now working against them. Once outside, the remnants of the vanguard realized the full extent of their strategic error. In the next chapter, you'll learn how the architecture of the fortifications withstood the first onslaught of the regrouped Spanish infantry. Having made it outside the walls of Mabila, De Soto ordered the retreating vanguard to regroup immediately. At the same time, straggling units of the Spanish infantry and the heavy supply train began approaching the city. The expedition regrouped, restoring its strength to 600 men, ready to counterattack. However, an impregnable palisade loomed before them, behind which 800 organized Confederate soldiers had taken cover. The Spanish commanders attempted to launch a classic assault on the settlement's wooden fortifications. They formed their infantry into a tight formation and directed them straight toward the narrow gates and bastions. Mabila's architecture brilliantly withstood the test of the advanced tactics of the European military school. The Choctaw warriors unleashed a dense barrage of arrows on the attackers from the safety of their cover behind the clay walls. The open space in front of the palisade left the colonizers no chance of approaching undetected. The narrow gates prevented the Spaniards from exploiting their numerical superiority at that specific point of the breach. The infantrymen got in each other's way as they tried to squeeze through the narrow doorway under constant fire from the defenders. The clay plaster on the palisade reliably stopped European bullets, minimizing damage to the defending forces. Tascaloosa's architectural design worked flawlessly, forcing the enemy to waste enormous resources. Every assault attempt faltered at the very base of the masterfully designed wooden walls. Inside the city, Confederate soldiers acted with remarkable composure and discipline. They did not succumb to panic and strictly followed the orders of their experienced local leaders. The communication system between the various defensive sectors functioned flawlessly, thanks to the well-thought-out layout. Reserve units quickly moved through the inner streets to those sections of the walls where support was needed. Mabila functioned as a single living organism, defending its integrity against external invasion. Realizing the futility of direct attacks, De Soto ordered the deployment of heavy weaponry from the supply train that had arrived. However, the city's architectural features once again nullified the expedition's technological advantages. The palisade was constructed with complex angles that prevented direct hits on the load-bearing supports. The defenders used observation posts to precisely monitor the movements of the Spanish artillerymen. This architecture of resistance forced the Europeans to change their tactical plans time and again. The Choctaw warriors did not limit themselves to passive defense behind high clay walls. Periodically, they launched lightning-fast sorties through hidden side passages in the palisade. Small groups of defenders destabilized the Spanish flanks and instantly returned to the cover of the city. These sorties wore down the colonizers psychologically, giving them not a moment's peace. The wooden fortress dictated its own rules of engagement for hours on end. The Spaniards began to realize that their usual methods of conquest were utterly useless here. They were facing not scattered groups of people, but a highly developed engineering culture. Mabila became a symbol of the insurmountable barrier between the empire's ambitions and the reality of an unfamiliar continent. The city's architecture proved that the local peoples were capable of effectively resisting even the most advanced armies of their time. That day forever changed the balance of power in the region. Tascaloola's engineering solutions enabled 800 warriors to successfully hold off 600 heavily armed professionals. Clay, wood, and precise geometry proved stronger than steel armor and firearms. The defenders maintained complete control over the settlement, not yielding a single inch of their native land. The colonial expedition's illusion of superiority was shattered against the sturdy walls of the Mississippi culture. The architectural triumph of the Choctaw ancestors was undeniable, but the day was not yet over. In the next chapter, you'll learn what radical decision the Spaniards made to break Mabila's resistance. Realizing that it was impossible to breach Mabila's defenses using standard methods, De Soto resorted to extreme measures. He understood that the city's architecture was not merely a defense, but the Confederacy's chief ally. The Spanish commander ordered that fire be used against the wooden structures of the fortified settlement. This was an admission of his own tactical impotence in the face of the indigenous people's superior engineering. Spanish soldiers began hurling burning torches and bundles of dry grass over the palisade. At first, the clay plaster on the walls effectively resisted the flames, preventing them from spreading. However, the thatched roofs of the inner houses, dried out by the autumn sun, proved more vulnerable to the fire. The blaze gradually began to engulf the structures, creating a thick curtain of smoke over the central square. The illusion of the wooden city's invulnerability was shattered by the destructive force of the elements. Despite the spreading fire, the 800 Choctaw warriors did not flinch or abandon their posts. They continued to methodically defend the perimeter, using the smoke to conceal their movements. Their high level of discipline allowed them to avoid panic amid the rapidly changing situation. Unit leaders coordinated the fighters' actions, redirecting them from burning buildings to safe zones. The defenders proved that their strength lay not only in their walls, but also in their incredible fortitude. The wall of fire temporarily halted the Spanish attempts to penetrate the city through the narrow city gates. The flames turned the city's architecture, which had been a trap, into a double-edged sword, dangerous to both sides of the conflict. The Confederation's warriors used this moment to regroup and prepare for the final stage of the confrontation. They understood that the loss of the buildings would alter the entire geometry of Mabila's interior space. The illusion of submission was finally burned away, along with the settlement's first thatched roofs. Meanwhile, outside the settlement, the Spanish expedition faced a completely unforeseen and critical logistical problem. Their entire heavy supply train, including gunpowder reserves, provisions, and valuables, was within dangerous proximity to the walls. Amid the chaos and smoke, the supply train's porters found themselves cut off from the colonists' main forces. The Choctaw warriors, who were conducting flanking raids, quickly assessed the importance of these unprotected resources. They shifted their focus to seizing the enemy detachment's supply base. With precise and swift actions, the defenders seized control of the Spanish property. They methodically destroyed what they could not carry away, depriving the expedition of vital supplies. The gunpowder was ruined, the food supplies were looted, and the valuables plundered by the Europeans were lost forever. This loss dealt a colossal blow to Hernando de Soto's entire future strategy on the continent. 600 Spaniards were left without means of subsistence in the heart of hostile territory. The fire at Mabila gradually died down, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the former fortifications. The defenders retreated into the nearby forests, preserving the combat effectiveness of the core of their 800-man force. They left the Spaniards with nothing but ashes and the bitter realization of their own strategic catastrophe. The colonizers entered the empty square, feeling neither the taste of victory nor a sense of superiority. The illusion of their power had dissipated along with the thick autumn smoke. The expedition was physically exhausted and morally crushed by the events of that grueling day. They had lost the initiative, their resources, and their confidence in their safety on Choctaw lands. Tascaloosa had achieved his primary goal. He had halted the empire's relentless march and sapped its energy. The warriors had proven their ability to inflict unacceptable damage even on the strongest of enemies. In the next chapter, you'll learn how a lack of resources forced the Spaniards to completely change the route of their expedition. After the events at Mabila, 600 European professional soldiers found themselves in a dire situation on the eve of winter. They had no medicine, no warm clothing, and no provisions left to continue their long march. The destruction of the supply train became the very trap that finally snapped shut around De Soto's expedition. The Tascaloosa strategy worked on a macro level, depriving the colonizers of any possibility of moving forward. The Spanish officers held an emergency council amid the smoldering ruins of the wooden town. They faced a choice: continue north into the unknown or retreat to the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Continuing without supplies of gunpowder and provisions meant certain exhaustion for the entire expedition. The specter of 800 elusive Confederacy warriors hiding in the surrounding forests loomed over every decision they made. A trap of doubt and fear firmly bound the will of the once confident European navigators. The expedition's command made the difficult decision to abandon their original grand plan to conquer the continent. They refused to advance deeper into the lands of the Choctaw ancestors and veered off their intended route. This decision was a direct result of Chief Tascaloosa's brilliant diplomatic and tactical maneuvering. The indigenous peoples forced the empire to retreat without winning a single conventional battle on open ground. They had won the decisive battle, the battle for resources, logistics, and strategic initiative. The remnants of De Soto's expedition began a slow and grueling advance away from the Confederacy's fertile lands. Their journey turned into a struggle for survival. Stripped of its former glamour and colonial ambitions, they no longer demanded submission from the settlements they encountered, but merely sought ways to feed themselves. The European war machine suffered a serious setback when confronted with a deep understanding of scorched earth tactics. Mabila's trap forever altered the course of the Europeans' first large-scale incursion into the region. 800 warriors of the Confederation continued to silently shadow the retreating column from a safe distance. They did not engage in direct combat, but their constant presence kept the Spaniards on edge. The defenders monitored the strangers' every move, ensuring their departure from their sovereign territories. This tactic of shadow pursuit prevented any attempts by the colonizers to replenish their lost resources at the expense of local communities. The Choctaw ancestors methodically drove the expedition beyond the limits of their sphere of influence. The Europeans suffered from food shortages and an unfamiliar climate as the cold set in. Their heavy armor, which had once struck terror into their enemies, was now nothing more than useless baggage for their weakened men. Deprived of gunpowder, they could not use their primary technological advantage, firearms. The expedition's isolation became complete and absolute, underscoring the genius of the chief's original plan. The trap set in Mabila had long-term devastating consequences for De Soto's entire logistics. The history of this clash proves that superiority in weaponry does not guarantee ultimate success. Victory is achieved through control of logistics, knowledge of the terrain, and the ability to exploit the enemy's mistakes. Tascaloosa and his 800 warriors taught the Spaniards a harsh lesson in tactical planning. They protected their interior lands from plunder, sacrificing only a single trading settlement. It was an ideal trade-off within the framework of the Mississippi culture's global political strategy. The secret lies in analyzing the governance systems of the two clashing worlds. Hernando de Soto's expedition represented the classic vertically integrated structure of the European military machine. Orders flowed from the top down, brooking no dissent, and initiative on the part of rank-and-file soldiers was strictly suppressed. This system was effective in direct conflicts, but proved inflexible in conditions of uncertainty. The clash with a completely different type of organization revealed all the hidden flaws of colonial administration. The Tascaloosa Confederacy relied on a complex network of horizontal connections between individual communities. The chief's leadership was based not on fear, but on deep respect and recognition of his strategic authority. Decisions were made with due consideration for the opinions of local leaders, which ensured a high degree of flexibility throughout the political system. The 800 warriors at Mabila operated like a well-coordinated orchestra, where each member understood his specific role. This decentralized efficiency came as an unpleasant surprise to adherents of strict European hierarchy. The Spaniards relied on their technological superiority and their accumulated experience in conquering other territories on the continent. They ignored the region's socio-cultural characteristics, viewing all indigenous peoples as a homogeneous mass. This fundamental error in perception deprived the expedition of the ability to adequately anticipate the actions of its intellectual adversary. They failed to recognize the Choctaws' complex diplomatic maneuvering until the very moment the gates of Mabila were closed. A system based on arrogance crashed against a system based on a deep understanding of human nature. The Choctaw ancestors masterfully exploited the information vacuum in which the outsiders found themselves on unfamiliar soil. They controlled the flow of information, carefully rationing details about their resources, routes, and true intentions. Spanish intelligence was paralyzed, receiving only the information that the locals allowed them to obtain. In this information war, the colonizers suffered a crushing defeat even before the active phase of the conflict began. Knowledge became the very invisible weapon that 800 warriors turned against 600 professionals. Logistics also revealed a colossal gap in efficiency between the two supply systems. The Spaniards were tied to their heavy supply train, without which their combat effectiveness rapidly plummeted to zero. The indigenous peoples, on the other hand, relied on a system of local supply depots and their ability to survive on foraging. The Confederation's warriors could move quickly and stealthily, unburdened by excess provisions. Lightness and mobility scored a decisive victory over the heaviness and slowness of the imperial supply train. The outcome of this clash of systems altered the Spanish crown's original plans for the entire southeastern region. The loss of the initiative at Mabila demonstrated the impracticality of further attempts at a rapid and aggressive conquest of these lands. De Soto's expedition went from being a formidable force to an isolated detachment wandering the continent. They lost their status as the term setters, shifting to a mode of constant and grueling survival. The Tascaloosa system proved its historical viability and supreme effectiveness in a crisis situation. But what then was the true price of colonial ambitions? After the events at Mabila, Hernando de Soto's authority among his own officers began to plummet rapidly. The loss of the entire supply train and the collapse of the expedition's plans triggered a deep crisis of confidence in the leader. The commander, accustomed to unquestioning obedience and easy victories, faced quiet sabotage from his subordinates. The price of Spanish overconfidence was reflected not only in the lost resources, but also in the moral decay of the expedition. De Soto desperately tried to conceal the scale of the disaster from the outside world and his potential rivals. He categorically forbade sending messenger ships to Cuba to request urgent resupply. The commander feared that news of his failure would destroy his reputation as an invincible conquistador at the royal court. His pride compelled him to lead 600 exhausted men deeper and deeper into the continent, without a clear plan of action. This decision ultimately sealed the fate of what had once been the most powerful expedition in the New World. Left without gunpowder or warm clothing, the Europeans were forced to adopt the survival methods of the local inhabitants. They wove mats from grass to keep warm in the winter, and used captured weapons instead of their broken muskets. The expedition lost its technological edge, transforming into a group of ragged and desperate wanderers in a foreign land. The 800 Choctaw warriors not only halted their advance, but also stripped the expedition of its civilizational superiority. The Spaniards came to know the harsh reality of survival in a complete logistical and informational vacuum. The local peoples, aware of the expedition's vulnerability after Mabila, ceased to fear the steel-clad horsemen. Relations between the colonizers and the indigenous population shifted from a phase of subjugation to one of permanent armed neutrality. The Spaniards could no longer dictate their terms with impunity. They had to beg for food and the right of passage. The region's geopolitical map was successfully protected from aggressive European intervention for many decades to come. The cost of De Soto's single tactical error was measured in decades of lost time for the Spanish crown. The expedition's route became chaotic, stripped of its original strategic logic of searching for golden empires. The party wandered aimlessly through river valleys, leaving behind only traces of its own slow decline. Ultimately, Hernando de Soto could not endure the hardships of the journey and ended his life ingloriously on the banks of the Mississippi. His grandiose expedition, which had struck terror into entire peoples, ended in complete and utter failure. This was the inevitable price for underestimating the intelligence and will of the leaders of the Mississippian culture. And now you will learn what historical fate befell the very architect of this grand victory. A mystery that has only now been revealed concerns the fate of the great leader after the smoke cleared over Mabila. The Spanish historical chronicles break off their account of Chief Tascaloosa immediately after the start of the clash within the city walls. The supreme ruler of the Confederation vanished without a trace, leaving no tangible evidence of his continued existence. None of the colonizers could confirm his presence among the city's defenders after the active phase of the conflict ended. This disappearance served as the perfect conclusion to the journey of a man accustomed to acting covertly and with impeccable strategy. For his people, Tascaloosa did not disappear, but dissolved into history as a symbol of insurmountable resistance. His primary goal was fully and unconditionally achieved. The empire's advance deep into sovereign territories was halted. He sacrificed one city to preserve the independence of hundreds of other settlements in his vast confederation. This choice demonstrates the highest level of statesmanship and an understanding of long-term historical perspectives. The chief became a legend whose name was passed down through oral traditions long before the advent of written records. The tactics employed by 800 Choctaw warriors under Tascaloosa's leadership have entered the annals of world military strategy. They prove that an asymmetric response, based on diplomacy and engineering, is capable of disrupting the logistics of a regular army. Their experience demonstrated the importance of maintaining composure and using the terrain to neutralize the advantages of a well-armed enemy. Mabila went down in history not as a site of defeat, but as the greatest trap ever set for overconfident colonizers. The chief's legacy lived on in the organizational principles of subsequent generations of indigenous peoples. The Spanish Empire learned this harsh lesson, and for a long time abandoned attempts at overland advances in this region. The ancestral lands of the Choctaw remained free from direct colonial rule for many generations to come. This breathing room allowed local communities to adapt to a changing world on their own terms. Tuscaloosa gave his people an invaluable resource, decades of peaceful development and cultural autonomy. His invisible presence continued to safeguard the Confederation's borders from outside encroachment. Tascaloosa's path was that of a leader who did not seek personal glory in open confrontations. He acted like a grand master, coolly placing his pieces on the giant diplomatic chessboard of North America. His final act was not to confront his enemies, but to quietly fade into the background of the civilization he had saved. He fulfilled his historic mission, leaving behind only a shadow that the Spaniards were never able to catch. This triumph of intellect will forever remain one of the most remarkable episodes in the defense of his homeland. We have traced the complex historical path of the clash between two fundamentally different systems of governance and military planning. From calm negotiations to a grandiose architectural trap, Tuscaloosa's strategy demonstrated the highest level of diplomatic and engineering ingenuity. 800 warriors of the Choctaw ancestors managed to deprive 600 heavily armed Spaniards of all their resources and strategic initiative. The hero of this story reached his final moment, defending the Confederacy's sovereignty and forever becoming part of his people's legends. This is a striking example of how cold calculation and knowledge of one's land can triumph over brute force and technological superiority. In the comments, suggest topics for future videos about little-known historical strategies of indigenous peoples that you'd like to see. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new in-depth analyses of historical events and human destinies.